Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Hello and welcome to this week's second episode of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mbogo, and on the show tonight, it's National Armed Forces Day, and the South African National Defence Force was out to show off its toys. But of what use are they really? We examine their role and function 28 years into democracy. Angry public sector unions are planning a march to Parliament tomorrow to send a message to the Finance Minister as he tables his budget. But will the protest action force Enoch Godongwana's hand? And finally, suspended public protector and advocate Busuwa Mkhwebane will give evidence to the parliamentary inquiry that's going to probe her fitness to hold office. The inquiry's revised program revealed today that Mkhwebane will indeed give evidence from the 15th of March for a period of about 10 days. All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. It's National Armed Forces Day, and President Cyril Ramaphosa took the opportunity to heap praise on all the components of the South African National Defence Force for continuing to protect the country and for ensuring that there is stability. Armed Forces Day is also used to commemorate the death of over 600 black South African troops who died on the SS Mendi in 1917. This year marks 106 years since the incident took place when soldiers were deployed to the front lines of the First World War in France.
Armed Forces Day, the South African Defence Force showcasing the country's military capabilities. This day, set aside for the country's last line of defence. These men and women in their uniform who have vowed to defend their country with their lives gathered in their numbers. Parades from all the wings of the South African Defence Force. Honouring them, the Commander-in-Chief and President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, has applauded them for their selfless service.
They have picked up the spears of our fallen heroes and heroines and continue the effort to give our people lasting peace, security, and stability.
This day is also set aside to remember those who lost their lives in service. This year marks 106 years since the sinking of the SS Mendi, which was carrying over 600 black soldiers. The troops were deployed to the forefront of the First World War.
On this day, we remember and pay tribute to all our fallen men and women in uniform who have lost their lives in the line of duty.
And a tribute to Sergeant Busi Mabena. Mabena was killed by a sniper while at the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC.
We mourn all those who have lost their lives in the effort to silence the guns on our continent. Just 2 weeks ago, we lost Flight Sergeant Busi Mabena when his helicopter came under attack in eastern DRC. We extend our deepest sympathies and condolences to his family, his friends, and his colleagues.
President Ramaphosa says the SANDF is an integral part of ensuring the stability of the country, particularly in relation to the ills that bedevil society.
I salute you all who carry out tasks in time of disaster that literally stand between life and death. We commend the exemplary selflessness, self-sacrifice, and patriotism of our armed forces who, even in the face of great danger, always put the interests of the country first.
Even while the South African National Defence Force continues to face financial challenges, these men and women in uniform continue to put their lives at risk on the forefront. Nhlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News, Richards Bay.
Professor Lindy Heineken is based at the University of Stellenbosch, where she is the Vice Dean responsible for research in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. She's also the author of the book, South Africa's Post-Apartheid Military. Good evening, Prof. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening. Good evening to all the listeners as well.
I guess only on days like these that we get to have these kinds of conversations where we bring in some of the views that people continue to express on a daily basis, but perhaps don't get to hog headlines because of a whole host of other topics that we talk about on a daily basis, whether it's the electricity crisis, whether it's crime, whether it's unemployment, or whether it's poverty. We then felt maybe on a day like today, let's then take that opportunity and reflect on some of the things that people often raise when they do get opportunities to talk about the army and its role in a democracy like ours, with all the challenges that we face. Perhaps a starting point would be the role of any army in any democracy.
Well, an army or in any democracy is there to defend the nation against external threats, so threats from outside of the borders of a country. But increasingly, we are seeing across the world that militaries are being used in domestic roles. And we see this in South Africa too. We see our military deployed in terms of countering gang warfare. We see them being deployed during COVID. We see them being deployed during disaster relief. We see them deployed on the border. But there's always a concern of deploying your military internally, because the military is trained to use coercive force against an external enemy. And as such, it often is not got the training, the equipment, or the preparation for these type of internal roles.
And we saw that some of that corrosive force during, or at least at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, how these soldiers treated people in places like Alexandra. Now, over the years, this has sort of become, at least in part, the role that the SAN Defence Force has had to assume. Has there been a corresponding sort of training programs that then equip these soldiers with the kinds of skills, but also attitudes that they need when they have to operate under these sorts of situations and circumstances?
My view is not. Our Defence Forces continues to be structured, funded and equipped for external conventional warfare. So they are trained for warfare, and they then have to downscale, and they are deployed in these type of operations, or what we call in a secondary role. And often the deployment of the military takes place quite quickly. We saw this also during the July riots, where and also during COVID, where there's not enough time to allow them to be trained and to prepared for these missions and to have an appropriate code of conduct. So soldiers instinctively see people who disobey the law as an enemy and treat them accordingly. And often this then involves military type tactics, using excessive force or things like corrective training, which is what they know. So I would definitely say that our military needs a wider skill set, especially if they're going to be deployed more internally. What we also see in other countries, if I can draw a comparison here, is that most other countries have what we call a constabulary force that sits kind of between the military and the police, either like a gendarmerie or a quandaberi, like in Italy, a gendarmerie in France, and the National Guard in the USA, which can transition quite easily between using coercive force and less force. So they've got a wider repertoire of skills. And while I'm not advocating that we should have a separate force, I do suggest going forward, as we are entering an era of defense review, that our soldiers are equipped with a wider repertoire of skills for the type of missions that they're going to be deployed in going forward.
I mean, as far as you know, as far as whether it's yourself or your colleagues or students or people who do postgraduate studies, has any evidence emerged suggesting that within our government and within the South African National Defence Force itself, such conversations are taking place?
I think you've raised such an important point, and why debates like we're having tonight is so relevant to our broader discussions around the future of our defence force, in that there is a complete, what we call, civil military, a knowledge gap in terms of the military. There's not enough public debate and not enough expertise in the country really to debate defence issues constructively, to provide guidance to the defence force and to provide these kind of inputs on defence matters.
I mean, this is very important because, I mean, you recall, Prof, what happened in parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, I mean, only a year ago or so. And, you know, the more the situation gets desperate, the more unemployed people you have, the more desperate they become, the more the inequality gap, you know, continues to grow. We are going to be confronted by restless communities and people desperate, to, have food, have a job, be able to sustain themselves. And often the knee-jerk reaction of politicians, I'm not saying that's what is definitely going to happen, but often the knee-jerk reaction becomes that, like, deploy, law enforcement or whoever you have to try and, keep the peace, make sure that people don't destroy property, they don't take to the streets and unleash violence on property, threaten, life and limb and so on. And those things can have disastrous consequences.
Absolutely. And I need to take us back to 1992, to 19, not in 19, in the early 90s, should I say, around 1994, when we debated what would be and I was part of that defence review process where we debated what should the future military look like. And one of the decisions that was taken was that the military should not be deployed in internal roles. And we see the deployment of the military, not being deployed in internal roles, a very limited role during the Mandela Mbeki era, and then increasing quite significantly as the country becomes unstable, more unstable in the Zuma era. And this continuing. Now, the danger of deploying your military in an internal role is that the military is seen as an arm of the state. And if the military uses coercive force and indiscriminate violence against civilians, then it will lose its legitimacy. And by implication, then the state will lose its legitimacy. So the state is always very careful in terms of how it's going to deploy its forces and in what roles. And if the military is going to be deployed in internal roles, it needs to be equipped and trained for these type of roles, which currently it is not.
And that underscores the importance of what we were saying earlier, that these conversations should be taking place. In other words, if commitments were made at the beginning that soldiers won't be deployed internally, when our reality now is that that is in fact happening. So something then needs to be done about orientating these soldiers, or at least some of them, to make sure that we do not see more of the scenes that we saw at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. But let's go outside, Prof, and talk about their role outside. Of course, gone are the days of invading Lesotho.
Yeah, well,
I'm saying this with my tongue firmly in my cheek.
Yes. Well, that was Operation Berlius was very much a botched up operation, and I think the military was again ill prepared for what they were to face during that so-called peacekeeping operation. But I do think we need to give credit to our Defence Force, and that is that they've been really, apart from the incidences of misconduct that we always see in the front lines of our newspapers, is that they have been very effective in peacekeeping operations. They've been prepared to go into areas which the other national forces deployed in peacekeeping operations have not. They have shown a better connection with the local population. We also deploy the largest number of women, approximately 15% of our peacekeepers on peacekeeping operations, which have been shown to enhance the operational effectiveness of these missions. And our Defence Force really has an I-can-do attitude, which is often not to their benefit, because they somehow manage to get things together despite the fact that they haven't got the resources to actually perform the tasks that they are expected to fulfill.
Well, as the President was saying, and it was attested to that as well, that our armed forces get deployed to these United Nations and AU peacekeeping missions, but then incidents such as the one the President mentioned today, Sergeant Vusi Mabena, who lost his life when his helicopter came under attack in the Western DRC. For the families and friends and, but also, South Africans who may not know these people, but when they hear of such things, they get worried, they get concerned, and they ask questions as to why, these soldiers have to go to these places.
It's very interesting, your response to this, and that the public really knows very little about what the Defence Force actually does. The Defence Force is in fact invisible to society in many respects. They don't know what tasks the military is doing. They don't know what the various functions that the military fulfills. They only really see the military when they see them in domestic operations. So, and this is again due to the fact that there isn't a larger public debate around military issues. And this is what has contributed to what we call the civil military gap, the knowledge gap that exists within broader society on the military in terms of what they are doing and what they're expected to do and the challenges that they face.
But then how do other nations or jurisdictions sort of manage these dynamics? Because I haven't heard of open like transparency, where everybody knows everything there is to know about what their military does and how. But how do they manage this dynamic so that there's an element of transparency, but there's also citizens are given a sense of comfort that their soldiers don't do things that they don't subscribe to as a nation?
Well, I think there's a number of factors involved here. I mean, as I mentioned, there isn't a big, broader debate around defence issues because the Defence Force has been seen to be largely irrelevant. We're not fighting a war, so why should we have a military? Why should we invest in a military? Little do people know that when we face a crisis and when we face disasters, that the military has got the collateral ability to perform a whole range of functions that can support other government departments. So, I mean, I think this is one of the key issues, that there isn't this larger debate. It's not unique to South Africa. We see the same type of concerns raised in many other countries, of course, now in Europe and the USA. These, of course, have the Defence Forces, of course, gained prominence, and we see a rise of militarism again, which we don't particularly want. I'd much rather money be invested in development rather than security.
Well, on that score, I mean, as you say, most of us don't have a clue what our Defence Force does, but very often you will hear the top brass of the Defence Force complaining bitterly, about lack of resources, about a budget that keeps going down. I was looking at the MTAF period. I mean, we're talking about 9 billion 2021, 2022, down to 5.3 billion 2022, 2023, 3 billion 2023, 2024. It's like sliding sharply, and other people are like, great. In fact, we don't need to be spending too much money on this anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, when any government faces a shortage of funds, it's a matter of how does one balance things. I think the Defence Force, it's not a case of that they not necessarily have too little money. It is how they're spending their money. And at the moment, the balance between what the Defence Force actually spends on personnel, what it spends on maintenance and stuff, and what it spends on operations is out of sync. So there is a dire need to relook at the structure of the Defence Force. Exactly what functions does the Defence Force need, and what are the real threats facing going forward? So you've only got X amount of money in your budget. So exactly how are you going to restructure your forces for this? And of course, retrenching military personnel is a very sensitive issue, because then you are putting trained soldiers back into the streets, which have got a very low or less of a skill set that the private sector can absorb. Mainly these people go into private security and related sectors. So there is always a concern when one comes to restructuring your Defence Force and if you're going to entrench personnel. But what is definitely needed is a restructuring of the military.
In fact, that's exactly where I wanted us to end this, because I mean there have been talks of retrenchments of about 3,000 members, but on the other hand, of course, there's been the very real fears that you've just spoken about as well, that when you release these people, what are you releasing them to? What are they going to do? Who's going to be able to absorb them? With what intention? And can they all be absorbed? And if not, and because that answer has been a definite no, and then what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've written a lot about the reintegration of what we call military veterans back into society, and they do face what we call a range of challenges, both to reintegrate politically, socially, and economically. But the concern is wider than this, is that the way the military is going about this is to offer retrenchment packages to the personnel. And often here in this case, it is the most skilled personnel that often leave. And we see a massive brain drain currently underway. So how this is going to affect the future Defence Force is a different dimension in terms of reducing the forces, because you don't really want to lose your skilled personnel, but on the other hand, you also need to shrink your military. The other issue that we face is that the Defence Force faces what we call rank inflation. So the Defence Force is top heavy in terms of ranks, got too many generals in relation to troops. So those are the type of issues that need to be addressed.
Let's leave it there for tonight, Prof, and thank you very much for enlightening us on this night. Professor Lindy Heineken, based at the University of Stellenbosch, where she is the Vice Dean responsible for research in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. She's also written a book, South Africa's Post-Apartheid Military. Now, Richards Bay residents came out in their numbers for Armed Forces Day today. The event, as we have been saying, coincides with the commemoration of the sinking of the SS Mendi in 1917 during World War I. Now, ahead of the military parade, President Cyril Ramaphosa paid homage to fallen heroes, laying a wreath at a World War II monument in nearby Mbangeni.
Full View, SABC News, independent, impartial.
Well, let's talk about the big day now, which is tomorrow's budget, going to be delivered by the Finance Minister. Social grant beneficiaries are hoping for good news when the minister presents that budget tomorrow. Nearly half of South Africa's population has received a social grant as from February last year. This translates to about 28 million social grants recipients in the country. Inflation and the increased cost of living has hit the poorest the hardest, and they hope that Kodongwana will give them some relief.
According to Stats SA, over half of households in the country receive grants. 24% of these social grants is their main source of income. One of the beneficiaries is Yvonne Mhlakazi. She stays in this shack with her 5 grandchildren. While she receives the 1,990 old age grant as well as grants for her grandchildren, she says this is not enough.
Ke lebeletsela mo di granting ka go ke na le tlogolo tse 5 ene ke mo di grant di tlogolo tse le tsone di kra di grant mara ke khone gore ka reka dijo tse di enough.
I'm only reliant on grants. I have 5 grandchildren who are also beneficiaries, but I can't afford to buy enough food. I can't afford to give them transport money. We end up having shortage. We live in this shack that's leaking. Truly, I can't even afford to buy clothes for them.
Ha ke khone go ka boreka mme ha ke khone ke dula ke sena sepe pele ga kgwedi ela.
Meanwhile, food prices skyrocketed in December 2022, with a basket of goods costing 13.5% more than the previous year. Mhlakazi says they do not have enough to feed everyone.
Food is expensive. We just buy the minimum that we can. We run out before month end. I'm just hoping that they increase grants so that I can afford to take care of my grandchildren.
With none of the grants receiving more than 5.7 increase last year, other beneficiaries are hoping for a substantial increase this year.
We took children to school. They are unemployed. In other words, we share our grants with them and our grandchildren.
Things are now expensive, so we will be happy if they increase grants so that we see how we survive.
I buy many things: gas, electricity, food, and have to pay funeral covers. If they can at least make it 2,500.
With the economy not picking up anytime soon, it could be a juggling act to ensure that the most vulnerable in the society are taken care of. Debogo Package, SABC News, Mahikeng.
Various public sector unions, meanwhile, are gearing themselves for a big march to Parliament tomorrow. Unions affiliated to the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, are protesting against the government's decision to go ahead and implement a wage offer that workers didn't agree to. However, workers affiliated to other federations, namely COSATU and FEDUSA, won't be part of tomorrow's protest march to Parliament, even though they share the grievances. In studio with me is SAFTU National Spokesperson Trevor Shago. Good evening, Trevor. Thanks very much for your time. Let's talk about, first about your plans for tomorrow. What, give us a bit of background, why you decided on this march.
Good evening, Vuyo, and the viewers of the Watchdog. So let me first also correct the fact that we are with COSATU actually tomorrow in Cape Town and even in Pretoria. So, but there are two combined marches. The first one is the one which SAFTU usually embarks on, that is to register the disagreements with how the fiscal policy in this country has been run. That is the first one. But the second one is that we are going to be combining our march and action with those of the public service unions, mainly those in COSATU and those in SAFTU. The reason for that is because we are protesting against the unilateral implementation of the 3% last year, but also that the minister must recognize not only that there ought to be a 10% increase in the context of the rising cost of living, but also that the minister must recognize that the headcount in the public sector is shrinking, and therefore the public sector wage bill ought to expand in order to ensure that these public institutions are not understaffed.
Now, okay, did you plan the march together, at least the second component
yes.
Of the march with the COSATU affiliated unions?
Indeed.
Okay,
Indeed.
Thanks for correcting me on that one. So what is the message you want to send to the government? In other words, what are your demands?
There are a number of demands. Remember, the Treasury, the South African Treasury led by Minister Enoch Godongwana, has inherited a treasury that is implementing the austerity program, but also is continuing with that austerity program. In the medium-term expenditure framework, they are planning to, of course, still continue with what they call fiscal consolidation, which is to cut areas of social expenditure in education, health, and others, to be able to ensure that they meet what they call debt stabilizing or fiscal risk stabilizing objectives.
It's a policy of his party. What do you say he has inherited? It was on the ANC has been in government for,
yes, indeed.
For 28 years. So it's the he goes in there. He says that himself time and time again, that he's there to implement. So
thanks for that, because actually that is part of what we must make clearer to the people out there, that those ministers, they merely represent what their organization, the ANC, the governing party, is actually putting forward. So these fiscal consolidations, these structural reforms which they're introducing are actually part and parcel of the policy of the ANC government. So indeed, we shouldn't at any moment try to separate the two. which is what they actually try to attempt in most instances. When you tell them this, they try to separate government and the ANC, whereas they are the ones who are the administrators in that. But the point I wanted to make is that the ANC has taken, first and foremost, as part of its commitment to the neoliberal capitalism or neoliberal capitalist development, but at the same time, the recommendation and expectations from the IMF and the World Bank that it must impose fiscal consolidation. But fiscal consolidation actually in the country and in the context of these problems we are having in South Africa is going to be very negative or bear negative results. And it is for this reason that SAFTU consistently points out that a number of these issues ought to be rejected. One of them is the fact that there has to be an increase in the public sector wage bill to increase the wages of workers and at the same time to increase the headcount. But number two, that there ought to be an increase in areas of service delivery, your housing, sanitation, and all of that. So all of this must be implemented, and they won't be implemented in the context of the budget cuts which the African National Congress government is carrying through.
But if you listen to the minister, as medium-term budget statement, he said that it is for the very same reasons you've just articulated. In other words, the need to have more police, more teachers, more nurses, and so on, that they cannot give the workers that are there what they need, because that money has to go to the hiring of the services of more additional staff, among other things. That's apart from fiscal consolidation and all these other things. Yeah. But he says there won't be money to hire more police. There won't be money to hire more teachers if that money goes to the salary increase, to increasing the wage bill.
So maybe we must separate the two. The first one is the question of where should the money come from? And the second one is there a necessity for us to increase the wages of workers? Yes, there's a necessity. There's a rising cost of living. But two, there's a necessity for us to expand the wage bill beyond increasing the wages. That is to ensure that we hire as much of public servants as possible. For instance, in the very medium-term budget policy statement of 2022, in the compensation section they write there that the police force has actually lost the headcount of in terms of rate, it has lost a headcount by 1.2%. And the correctional service has not grown. This is between 2015, 2016 and 2021, 2022. So, and you also have other departments which include law and order, the NPA and the courts, the Home Affairs, which are also losing in this context, which means at a time when we are facing crises like that of undocumented migrants, as people have come to actually monopolize and take advantage of that to harbor xenophobic sentiments against people who are coming to this country. At that time when we need such people to be able to assist these people in our borders and all that, the Home Affairs is actually experiencing a reduction in the headcount. The Correctional Service has not experienced any growth at all in the past 6 years for the year ending 2022 April. And then you also look, for instance, at the police. At the time, for instance, the Minister of Police just released the crime statistics 2 days or a day ago. And in those police statistics, he shows that crime levels in various categories, in all categories, in fact, have increased. Contact crimes, property-related crimes, all of them have increased. You need people, a formidable workforce in terms of numbers first, but also, of course, in terms of training, equipment, and the availability of vans in those departments for that department to be able to ensure that it combats crime. So if you reduce the headcount, you are not going to achieve anything. But we are saying to Minister Godongwane that you can't make workers suffer in terms of the living conditions because you want to contain the public sector wage bill and benefit the headcount. Anyway, they are not benefiting the headcount with that consolidation in the public sector wage bill.
It looks unlikely that is going to budge. you will, of course, have made your statement tomorrow by marching in Cape Town and in Pretoria. But you've already taken a decision that you're going to go on strike.
Yes, the public service unions gathered and decided that first, as a resolution, they're not going to form part of the wage negotiations for the salary negotiations 23-24 until this particular demand, which comes from the dispute of 22-23, is resolved. So this is the first one. But secondly, they've also decided that they will have to embark on an indefinite strike. The details of this strike will, of course, have to follow in the nearest future. But we are going to have to coordinate together. We have to also awaken the masses of our people out there, 70 to 80% of whom benefit from these public services. Because if we do not fight together, the decline, the collapse of the public service does not only affect the workers, but also affect those who must benefit from these particular services. So we are going to have to create a solid and formidable alliance with the working class organizations, which we are already doing. In fact, in Cape Town, we are coordinating with them, the Cry of the Excluded, the Assembly of the Unemployed, the Travel Unemployed movement, and all of those movements which we collaborate with in trying to resist the neoliberal onslaught, but also just general crisis of capitalism, which has led to unemployment skyrocketing, which has led to poverty increasing, inequalities increasing, which actually, by the way, leads to another demand which is based on the, or related to the social grants, because we have been demanding the introduction of the basic income grant, the introduction of the jobs guarantee scheme, so that we alleviate these crises of capitalism. But if Treasury continues on this particular trajectory, we're not going to achieve anything and improve the living conditions of our people.
Well, we'll see, of course, what the minister says tomorrow and what will happen or come out of your protest marches in both Cape Town and Pretoria. Trevor Shaku from SAFTU, of course, talking about what they hope to do tomorrow and what they hope it will achieve and what they will do in the event things don't go their way. To this now, suspended public protector advocate Busua Mkhwebane will finally give evidence to the parliamentary inquiry that's probing her fitness to hold office. The inquiry's revised program, revealed today, shows that Mkhwebane will give evidence from the 15th of March for a period of about 10 days. The inquiry began in July last year. It is looking at allegations of misconduct and incompetence against Mkhwebane. This relates to adverse court findings against her in a number of high-profile cases. The inquiry has once again been bogged down by Mkhwebane's concern about the non-payment of her legal team. Mkhwebane was criticized by the committee for the tone and language she expressed in her dissatisfaction with the committee over how it is handling the non-payment of her legal team. The inquiry is aiming to finalize its work by the end of April. Mkhwebane wants the chairperson, Ubudile Janji, to withdraw the contents of his letter in response to her concerns over non-payment.
Indicated that the chair would not issue an apology or withdraw the letter or make any undertakings in respect of future conduct. So what that leaves the committee with now is to engage with, in the main, those two pieces of correspondence, obviously understood against the background of what had unfolded in the week earlier, and then to determine whether there are any steps the committee wishes to take in dealing with the matter.
We cannot carry on like this. We are clearly being prevented from doing our work, and in this letter they accuse you of throwing tantrums and other, throwing insults. If we've seen any tantrums being thrown and insults thrown, it's come from the PP's legal team.
I note that the tone and the language used in the Thursday meeting is now transferred in writing in this letter, something that I find extremely objectionable. And because it is in the hand of the PP, and she understands what language is acceptable in this forum, I think as a committee we must direct her to, or bring that to her attention, that using such language is not acceptable, really.
On the day the PP comes, start the witness proceedings herself, that they start with that and put those matters so that it's not affecting any other witness. It is done on that day. That could be the first thing they start with, to just air out whatever they want to air out and immediately proceed to have the PP putting the testimony. So I'm just asking so that we are not seen as not having responded to that request of hear us.
We were on the investigation of the breach of the ethics code in respect of the benefit of a judge. You indicated
we can't have lies being perpetuated and your people writing things and you just sign, Chairperson.
Well, to talk to us about this, Ntabi Singh is Ntabi Singh Dubazana from Dubazana Attorneys. Ntabi Singh, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Ntabi Singh, can you hear us?
Thank you so much for having me, Vuyo.
Well. I mean, that I think from those sound bites we played.
I can hear you.
Yes, I am hearing you. I'm saying from those sound bites that we played, of course, we went back a little for context. Do you think that from what we were told today, that according to this revised program, Mkhwebane will indeed, or finally, give evidence from the 15th of March for a period of about 10 days? Do you think the worst is over?
Well, if she's able to have her attorney's legal fees sorted out, the likelihood of the matter proceeding on the 15th of March is very high. Seeing as this inquiry, Section 194 inquiry, is actually something new in our country, it's never been done before. From what I've observed, they're trying to conduct it in almost a similar manner to that of a criminal trial, in that the evidence of the state in this matter is being led first, and then to be followed by the accused's version of events, which is now where Mkhwebane and her witnesses can now give their evidence. Since we've gone through all the 23 witnesses who were called rather to show basically her incompetence in holding that office. Now it's her turn to show that she is indeed competent. And I believe the reason that she's going to, or she requested that the previous public protector, Member Tonzela, to come in to testify, because most of the files or matters she overtook from her, which were partially investigated and all of that, so she can explain to the committee what it is that she had done prior to Mkhwebane coming in. So, but I think the main hurdle will probably be that of financial actions to her attorney.
Yes, and because the public protector, acting public protector, has taken this decision that to appoint people who will look, at the invoices and everything around them. Do you foresee, a bit of a, delay as a result of that? Maybe people disputing this and then the other one having to show proof, and then a lot of toing and froing, which may affect even this 15th of March date that has now been set for her to begin her own, giving her own evidence. Okay, looks like we're having serious problems with Ntabi Singh's line. But of course, hope there is hope, certainly from among the members of that committee, that nothing will stop the 15th of March. They seem to believe that all hurdles may have been cleared. Tabi saying, I'm hoping that you are back with us. What I was saying was to you, from where you sit, and given how this whole inquiry has gone up until now, that this issue of the acting public protector deciding to appoint people who will have to look, at the invoices and everything around them, may just delay this inquiry further? No, we don't have him. Well, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there.
I do think so. Remember, they have to also report to government as to...
Go ahead, yet continue, Tabsing.
I don't know if I'm still audible.
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. Because the acting public protector has to report for the finances that they have spent pertaining to the matters Mem-Khwebane. So as a result, they would have to make sure that those invoices are basically impeccable and they can stand the test of time when audit time comes and all of those things. And once they are satisfied that those invoices from the legal team at Mem-Khwebane are suitable and all of those things, then they will pay payment towards that. And remember, because she was granted permission by the Constitutional Court to be allowed to have legal representation,
yes,
which is basically your right as enshrined within the Constitution, they cannot now take that right away and say you're wasting our time because now you're not paying your legal representative and therefore you're delaying us. She has that right for her to have legal representation, and therefore the committee has no choice but to wait until she's in a position to continue with her legal representation, representatives, I beg your pardon, and therefore that might also add to the delay of the hearing.
Yeah, well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It would seem that the acting public protector, is obviously not disputing, her rights to be represented. There's that history that is just so well articulated, but I think it's whether it seems to be whether the costs, her legal costs, are reasonable, but also whether she's stuck to what the acting public protector suggests was an agreement. In fact, maybe I should read this. It says that both Advocate Mkhwebane and her legal team were advised at the outset that the Public Protector's Office would seek to ensure that such estimated costs are reasonable, which I think is a giveaway. I don't know, you can tell me, the lawyer, I'm not, and budgeted for, and in line with the Public Finance Management Act. There seems to be a suggestion there, if one reads in between the lines, that they don't believe that is the case. Yeah. I don't know what your reading is.
It depends then again who the person who's going to be handling the particular paperwork is going to read the word reasonable to be, because reasonable in an objective kind of situation. In the legal sphere, we know if you're going to be hiring silks. So silks are advocates that have more than 10 years of experience. Their fees are expensive. And in order for you to instruct counsel, you need to have an attorney's firm who will then instruct counsel to continue. So now if you have two senior counsels representing you, which their daily fees sometimes can be 100,000 and above, and also you have the attorney's fees, who are the ones drafting all the paperwork and all of that that's going to go to counsel, you're paying their fees over and above that. So saying that it is reasonable. How is it reasonable? Based on which tariff? Based on, is it the magistrate court tariff, A, B, and C, and D? What are you looking at? Is reasonable in terms of the experience of the legal team that is there? Or are you trying to minimize reasonable when it comes to the tariffs that are out there, which have been increased, by the way? So I don't understand. I think, like I said, it depends on how the person who's looking at the paperwork and the money is there understands reasonable to be in that instance.
Well, let's leave it there, and Tabiseng, and thank you so much for coming on. That line wasn't playing ball, but at least we tried. Tabiseng Dubazana from Dubazana Attorneys, suspended public protector advocate Mkwebane will finally be able to give evidence before the inquiry that's probing her fitness to hold office. It was revealed today that she will give evidence from the 15th of March for a period of about 10 days. All of that, of course, subject to this issue we just spoke about with Tabiseng being resolved. And that's the issue of the payment of her legal, the public protector, suspended public protectors' legal fees. And that's our program for tonight. To join us again tomorrow when, of course, we bring you that budget special. Until then, have a good night and a great day tomorrow.